You've been told your whole life that ancient humans got their 8 hours, slept when the sun went down, woke when it came up. Pure, uninterrupted, natural sleep. The kind we've supposedly lost to phones and streetlights and caffeine. There's just one problem. It's almost entirely wrong. The people who lived before electricity didn't sleep more than you. In some cases, they slept less. And the way they slept, the actual mechanics of a night in a prehistoric camp, was so strange, so deliberately broken up, that if you did it today, a doctor might diagnose you with a disorder. So the real question isn't how did ancient humans survive without real sleep? It's stranger than that. Because they had real sleep. They just had a completely different version of it. And the reason why might be watching you from the corner of your own bedroom right now. Let me show you what a night with our ancestors actually looked like. Because once you see it, you'll never think about your own tossing and turning the same way again. Here's where we have to start, and it's going to annoy some people. For decades, there's been this romantic idea floating around. That before we ruined everything with artificial light, humans slept long, deep, healing sleep in tune with nature. Then Edison came along, flipped a switch, and cursed us all with insomnia. It's a beautiful story. Scientists went looking for proof of it. And what they found instead broke the whole fantasy. Researchers strapped sleep tracking devices onto members of 3 different groups who still live largely without electricity. The Hadza in Tanzania, the Sun in Namibia, and the Tsimané in Bolivia. 3 groups, 3 continents, no streetlights, no phones. If the natural sleep paradise idea were true, these were the people who'd be living it. They slept, on average, somewhere between 5.5 and 7 hours a night. Read that again. That's not more than you. For a lot of people watching this, that's less. The people living the closest thing we have to a pre-industrial life were not out sleeping the modern office worker. Our best guess at natural human sleep turned out to be shorter, not longer. So much for paradise. But here's the tell that changes everything. It wasn't just how long they slept, it was when and how that got weird. Because these groups didn't drift off the second the sun disappeared. On average, they stayed awake for around 3 hours after sunset. They'd sit by the fire, tell stories. Basically, they had an evening. The idea that ancient humans collapsed at dusk like their batteries died, that's a myth too. And what pulled them into sleep wasn't darkness at all. It was the cold. As the temperature dropped through the night, their bodies followed it down into sleep. And as it began to warm again before dawn, they woke, most of them up before sunrise, not after. Temperature, not light, was the real off switch. Which is a little humbling when you think about it. We spend a fortune on blackout curtains. Our ancestors just let the night get cold and let their own bodies do the rest. But if their sleep was short, and it started late, and it ended before sunrise, how on earth was anyone keeping watch? You're a small band of humans, asleep in the open. In a landscape that contains large animals who consider you a reasonable dinner. Sleep is the most defenseless thing a living creature does. You go blind, deaf, and paralyzed for hours on purpose. For most animals, that's a death sentence waiting to happen. So how did we ever get away with it? The answer is one of the most beautiful pieces of detective work in all of sleep science. And it starts with a number so strange the researchers almost couldn't believe it. Scientists spent 20 nights observing a group of Hadza while they slept. Around 22 people. Adults tracked minute by minute through the entire night. And they were looking for one specific thing. How often was everybody asleep at the same time? Out of those 20 nights, thousands and thousands of minutes of darkness, the number of minutes where every single person was asleep at once was 18. 18 minutes, total across 20 nights. For basically the entire night, every night, someone in that group was awake. Not on guard duty, not assigned a shift, just awake. Naturally, at any given moment, around 8 people out of the group were stirring, shifting, briefly surfacing from sleep while the rest went under. And here's the punchline that reframes the whole thing. Nobody planned it. There was no schedule. No one drew straws for the night watch. The group protected itself without a single person deciding to. They just had different sleep clocks. This is the part almost nobody expects, and it's the heart of the whole story. So, stay with me because it's about to explain something about your own family. We all know these people. There's the friend who's basically useless before 10 a.m., but weirdly alive at midnight. And there's the one who's cheerfully making breakfast at 5:30 while everyone else wants to strangle them. Night owls and morning larks. We usually treat this like a personality quirk, or a bad habit, or something you're supposed to fix. It's not a bug. It might be one of the oldest safety features our species has. Think about what happens when you scatter those clocks across a group. The night owls are still up at 1 a.m. poking the fire. By the time they finally crash, the light sleepers are surfacing. By the time they drift off, the early risers are already stirring. Layer enough different internal clocks on top of each other, and you get a group that is never, not for more than a few minutes, completely unconscious at the same time. No guards needed, no sacrifice required. The protection just emerges from the fact that we're all a little different. And the researchers found something even more specific. The single biggest predictor of who woke early wasn't sex, or how many kids were sleeping next to you, or the weather. It was age. The older you got, the earlier your clock ran. Which leads to my favorite name any scientist has ever given a theory. They called it the poorly sleeping grandparent hypothesis. Grandma's not broken, grandma is the night watch. That thing we treat as a medical problem, older people waking at 4 a.m., sleeping in fragments, up before the birds, may be a role our species depended on for hundreds of thousands of years. The elders, sleeping light and rising early, were the tail end of an unbroken chain of wakefulness that covered the group from dusk to dawn. We put them in a sick roll and hand them pills. Our ancestors would have called them essential. So that's the picture. A group of humans, sleep clocks staggered like overlapping shifts nobody signed up for, quietly keeping each other alive through the dark. Now flip the entire thing around. Because here's what this really means, and it's going to sting a little. Everything modern medicine calls a sleep problem, waking up at 3 a.m. And lying there staring at the ceiling, the older relative who can't sleep past dawn, the teenager who's physically incapable of sleeping early, the light sleeper who wakes at every creak, we've spent decades treating all of it as malfunction, as disorder, as something gone wrong with your brain. But look at it through our ancestors' eyes and the whole diagnosis inverts. The person who wakes at 3 a.m. isn't malfunctioning. They're doing exactly what a healthy human body evolved to do. Surface, scan the dark, confirm it's safe, drift back down. For most of human history, waking in the night wasn't a symptom. It was the system working perfectly. The teenager who can't fall asleep until 2 a.m. and can't wake before noon? In a prehistoric band, that's not a lazy kid. That's your late shift sentinel. That's the one covering the most dangerous hours while the elders rest. We didn't lose our ancestors' sleep. We inherited it completely. And then we built a world that calls it a disease. That's the reversal. The broken sleep so many people quietly suffer through, feeling like their body has betrayed them, that pattern isn't a fault in the design. It might be the oldest and most successful feature in it. You're not failing at sleep. You're running software written for a savannah that no longer exists. Sit with that for a second. Then let's talk about how deep this actually goes. Because there's a second piece of evidence, and it comes from history, not the field. A historian named Roger Ekirch went digging through old documents, diaries, court records, medical books, letters, going back centuries across Europe. And he kept tripping over the same odd phrase, again and again, first sleep. And then, later in the same night, second sleep. People wrote about it as if it were obvious, as if everyone knew what it meant. They'd go to bed, sleep for a few hours, and then wake up, on purpose, expectedly, in the middle of the night. And during that gap between the two sleeps, they'd do things. Pray, talk quietly, tend the fire, visit a neighbor, and then go back down for their second sleep until morning. The waking wasn't a problem to be solved. It was just part of the night. A normal room in the house of sleep with a name on the door. Now, I want to be honest with you here because credibility matters. Not everyone agrees on how universal this was. Some researchers argue Ekirch's evidence is a bit selective, that first sleep and second sleep might have been more common in some places and times than others, and we shouldn't turn it into an iron law of all human history. That's a fair fight, and it's still being argued. But even the skeptics agree on the core thing that matters here. Waking in the night was often treated as ordinary. Not alarming, not a sign something was wrong, just a natural pause in the dark. which means the anxiety might be the actually new invention. Here's the thought that got me. It's not that our ancestors woke less than us. It's that when they woke, they didn't panic. You know the feeling. You surface at 3 a.m., and within about 90 seconds, you've done the math on exactly how little sleep you're going to get, how wrecked tomorrow will be, why you can't function, and the anxiety of that math is the very thing that keeps you awake. The waking is ancient. The dread is modern. We took a completely normal biological event and wrapped it in fear, because we've been told the only real sleep is the 8-hour unbroken block, a standard our ancestors would have found baffling. So when you ask how did ancient humans survive without real sleep, the honest answer flips the whole question inside out. They survived because of the kind of sleep we've been taught to be ashamed of. The short nights, the staggered clocks, the waking in the dark. That wasn't the absence of real sleep. That was real sleep, the real thing, the original thing, doing exactly what it was built to do. And there's one last piece I can't stop thinking about. Remember, sleep is when an animal is at its most helpless. Evolution should have been screaming at us to sleep as little and as lightly as possible. And in a way, it did. We sleep less than almost any other primate. A lot of our relatives clock 10, even 15 hours. We get by on a fraction of that. But here's the trade we made. Because we slept in groups, because we watched over each other through those staggered clocks, we could afford to make the sleep we did get much deeper and richer than it should have been. We could sink into the dense, dreaming, memory-weaving sleep that a solitary animal in the open could never risk. The group bought us the safety to dream, which means something quite lovely if you let it land. Our big, strange, creative human minds, the memory, the imagination. The problem solving that all gets stitched together in deep sleep, that might exist partly because our ancestors trusted each other enough to close their eyes. We could afford to go deep because we were never truly alone in the dark. So tonight, when you wake at some hour you'd rather not, and you feel that old flash of frustration, that sense that your body is doing something wrong, I gently offer you the other reading. Somewhere in you is a very old instinct, surfacing in the quiet to check that the world is still safe. Behind you stretches an unbroken line of humans who woke exactly like this, in the cold and the dark, and simply looked around and found that it was okay and let themselves fall back down into sleep. You didn't lose the natural way to sleep. You're still doing it, you just forgot it was never supposed to feel like failure.